So, Elemental is coming on the heels of Pixar's most recent effort, which was about a year ago, in fact, Lightyear, and previously before Lightyear was also Turning Red. 2022 was sort of a mixed so-so year for Pixar, I would say. Turning Red was very successful. Many people really loved that movie and enjoyed it. It became one of the most watched on Disney Plus. Lightyear was not so successful. Unfortunately, it ended up being one of their biggest financial losses that they've ever sustained from a theatrical film. And people just didn't really connect with Lightyear. I think that the
Mhm.
difficulties of trying to take a character that's so beloved in the Toy Story universe and making him real and sort of making him like a science fiction superhero, it just didn't work for people. And so it was going to be really interesting to see what the follow up was going to be for Pixar coming this year with Elemental. And we know that Disney as a company, especially Pixar, has been on somewhat rocky ground over the past couple of years. The pandemic, I think, has certainly forced them to take a back step, and they're sort of fighting from behind at this particular point. So I was curious and interested to see what Elemental was going to do in terms of alleviating that. But I will let you go first. What did you think about the new Pixar film Elemental?
Man, I was excited for this movie. This is one of the films that I picked in our summer draft. I was really betting on Pixar, man, because they've just been going through a lot. And not even necessarily critically. We know you just talked about Lightyear, but financially too. And now Elemental is like what the worst outing for any Pixar movie ever. It's crazy. It's really sad, I think, to see. But regarding the movie, man, it is just it just wasn't for me. Maybe I don't know. That's crazy to say because usually this movie would be. I love animation and I love rom coms, and I feel like putting the two together, I should have had a great time. But to be honest, and to put it quite frank, I was just bored. I was just bored. And it's I have to give them a little bit of points for taking some kind of risk, right? Because how often have you seen just a straight rom com and that's animated? Anime fills that space. Intergalactic that we just reviewed not too long ago filled that space. But here we go. Pixar was kind of trying to fill this space too, and I just found myself again just being bored. Maybe I'm not the age demographic. Something else that usually coming into a Pixar film outside of story elements and all of that, I'm excited about the animation, and it's something now that I feel like Pixar used to be the people always pushing the envelope. Pixar used to always be the people that's like, dang, that looks really good. In fact, I even remember talking about Lightyear, and though Lightyear isn't perfect, Lightyear looks pretty goddamn good to me. Elemental doesn't feel like that. Elemental fits this weird realm that it's almost like if we were to make an Inside Out 2 that came out over what 10 years ago now, it's not a much step up from that to me. And I was watching it like this feels the same vein. And I wanted it to be different. I love the idea of elements. I love the idea of our two main characters being in love, but they can't touch each other. That's a really cool premise to me. But the beats that the story is just hitting was just so boring. I don't know. Maybe I'm being too hard. To be honest, I do want to watch it again with like just a different time, different time of day, a little bit removed from Across the Spider-Verse. You know what I'm saying? Like, let me go chill out for a little bit and come back to it. But for right now, man, it was just boring, and that's really all I have to say about it. Like I just wished it was pushing the envelope. Like to me, Turner Red did something different. Soul did something different. You know what I mean? But now we're here, and it's like you did something different, but not with the same soul. I know that, lack of a better term, it didn't have the same goosebumps that I feel like those other movies did, and so it was just disappointing going into it. I just expected a little bit more, but who knows? I'll check it out again at some point, and maybe my mind will change.
I'll just start and say that I don't have much to add because this is one of Pixar's worst outings for me. This just does not work on really any level. And to walk out of a Pixar film saying that is just quite the disappointment. I will be honest and say that the past few years of Pixar outings overall haven't really worked for me either, with the exception
Mm-hmm.
of Turning Red. I even think Soul, like I love the first act of Soul, but then I think it kind of falls off of a cliff after that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have other movies like Luca, which I don't even remember anything
Ooh.
about Luca, and Lightyear, which I didn't love, and Onward. Like there are just a lot of forgettable experiences that just aren't connecting with me anymore. And now with Elemental, this absolutely has slotted itself into being one of the most forgettable and one of the least enjoyable movies that I've watched come from that studio. And it is mind-boggling boring. I was so just anxious to be finished with this movie because there was not really any point in which I bought into the story, in which I bought into the characters, or even the world that they developed, because they did create a new world, an element-based world, right? And you think
Mm-hmm.
that that would be something to pull you in and to attract you to what they're trying to do and trying to achieve with the story, but it just doesn't, because it just feels so cookie cutter and almost unoriginal, which is very weird to say because they haven't created a world quite like this before. But Pixar has created a lot of worlds. They've done this
Mm-hmm.
countless times over. And this just falls incredibly short of, I think, the high watermark that they've set in previous movies. And I just don't really understand creatively what's necessarily happening over there. I do know that in terms of the filmmakers behind a lot of these recent projects, Peter Son included, because he also directed one of my other least favorite Pixar movies, The Good Dinosaur, 7 years ago. A lot more of these Pixar films are becoming more personal to the filmmakers that are crafting them, which is okay in the conception of that. But I think in the delivery of that idea, when you have something that is so personal to the filmmaker, and maybe they're even pulling from their own life experiences, like Peter Son is doing for this movie, because he's talking about the immigrant experience and living in New York City and
Mm-hmm.
growing up amongst all these different communities. I don't know if that's just connecting. I don't know if that's really working for me. And perhaps it is working for this current generation, just because that's often the conversation that many people are having anyway, especially as it relates to the stuff that they consume from film and TV and social media and all these other things. And so perhaps it is working for a lot of people of a younger generation. For me, coming from the previous generation that discovered Pixar, that was around when they launched with
Facts.
Toy Story, it's just not connecting. And maybe that is just a harsh realization that the movies that they are making, at least in the current era, are just not for me. And so I have to come to grips with that personally.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that, still judging it for a movie and for a theatrical going experience, I just didn't enjoy it. That's just the fact of it. And regardless of whether or not it's made for me, or if I'm the target demographic, or maybe I'm just not prepared and ready to shift with the updated themes that they're trying to tackle and just the story structure that they've implemented in their recent movies. It could be all of that, but I'm still
Mm-hmm.
going to talk about the movie in the way that I want to talk about it, and it just didn't work for me. It didn't deliver on what I wanted it to. It didn't make me happy. There was nothing really memorable about it. I didn't laugh once because there was a little bit of comedy. I didn't laugh not one time in this film, and the romance and the central story here between the two characters, I just never bought into it. And so I
Mm-hmm.
ultimately left really, really, really disappointed at the experience. We've kind of talked about this before. I think it's necessary to bring it up again. The state of Pixar in the animation landscape, and also just the state of Disney, because they also have their other animation studio, Walt Disney Animation. There have just been a
Mm-hmm.
lot of, for lack of a better term, misfires. Just many of their movies are not performing in the way that they used to. You know, it was once just the status quo for a Pixar movie to come out, or even a Disney animation movie to come out and just make all the money. Sometimes just knock it out of the park easy, make $1 billion. That is no longer the case. I think a lot of that is due to the fact that audiences and families in particular have been trained to stay home to watch these new animated movies. They're not really going out to theaters to see this anymore due to the pandemic. But outside of like the financial prospects, creatively, what do you make about just the current state of where they are? Because I think by and large, many of these movies aren't connecting in the way that a lot of fans, especially long-term fans of Pixar, will like to see them work. And I think that that's, partially attributed to the fact of why we're seeing live action remakes and adaptations of animated movies that have just like come out. We just heard about Moana, which came out like 6 years
Yeah.
ago, and they're going to make it
Mm-hmm.
into live action. So I don't know, where do you stand creatively with just like Pixar and Disney as a whole, and just like their animation outputs?
Man, I think it's crazy because every time, Bob Iger or whoever the CEO is, it's always how can we turn out more content? How can we push this stuff out? And man, I'm looking at the list of Disney movies right now. I reviewed Strange World on this podcast. Since Strange World, Disney has put out 12 movies if you count all the way up to Haunted Mansion. So that's including Guardians, Indiana Jones, like Little Mermaids in here, Peter Pan and Wendy, Ant-Man, Quantumania, like 10, 12 movies
In like eight
since Strange
months.
in like 8 months is crazy for any studio. Of course, we know some of those, that's Marvel Studios over here, Pixar Studio. It's still the idea that Disney is turning out a lot of content. They got to stop, man. You got to slow down because I feel like it's hurting them even more. For Elemental to be the worst Pixar opening weekend ever has to tell you something. Something's not right.
Pump the brakes.
Something, pump the brakes. Everybody stop. Something isn't right. I agree with you. Every movie that you just brought up, Pixar in the last whatever, like last 6 movies you just said, are not touching the first 10 years of Pixar at all. It's not even close. Toy Story 1 came out, broke the world. Somehow they came out with a sequel and broke the world again with Toy Story 2. Toy Story 3 also, like, and that's just one franchise. We're not talking about Incredibles or A Bug's Life or Wall-E or I don't know what's happening. I don't know what has happened to Pixar, but it's time to slow down, reevaluate. Pixar, you're getting cooked. Disney, you're getting cooked. You're getting cooked. Sony, Illumination and Sony are they're owning Disney right now in the animation landscape. They're owning them. It's not close. It's not close. These Minion movies hitting bills and close to bills
easy in their sleep. They can just put out a movie and it's going to make $1 billion. Like, they don't even have to think about it. And it's the most simplistic story and movie possible. Like, you can't get more simple than the Minions movies, but they work. Can't. People go see them
because they're funny. I love the Minions. They're funny. You watch them and they have gold in their hands. So they're milking it. Don't get me wrong. They are milking it, but it's like, at least they're decent movies too at the same time. And I feel like they know what they have. But even then, thinking about that, it's one property. Pixar's just struggling, man. I don't know. They need to figure it out. And I think it really just started with turning down these movies they're coming out with, man. Like, as we just talked about, Peter Pan and Wendy. Why'd y'all make that? Imagine if everybody who wasn't on work in Peter Pan and Wendy maybe helped you on freaking Elemental. I don't know. Just like, I don't know. Figure it out. It's time. It's time to slow down and stop turning out so many movies. Quality needs to be over quantity. And it's like they didn't get it at first, but hopefully this is like the ding moment for them, like the bell over the head, because it's really getting sad out here.
Yeah, the decline has been steady and precipitous, and it's alarming, especially when you just see this trend really settling in. And a part of it does have to be attributed to the leadership change as well. You know, Pete Docter is the chief creative officer now. He took over for John Lasseter a few years ago. John Lasseter, you know, this is what I'll say. He's a very problematic figure, has a lot of criticisms you can, you know, sort of throw at that man, and certain stuff that he did that is just completely unacceptable and gross. But during his particular tenure was the golden era of Pixar. You know, he was the creative force behind a lot of that stuff, especially with the Toy Story movies. Pete Docter is a great filmmaker. He's made, I think, some of the best Pixar movies, like Inside Out. You know, he's really, really good at that, or Monsters, Inc. But as the creative force behind these things and being the leader, you know, sort of thrown into the position that he's in, leading this huge company, something just has not worked and has not clicked over these past few years. And it isn't just him. I'm not here to throw all the responsibility on him by any means, because there are forces above him that have certainly impacted this as well, that I alluded to earlier, just with the output and just increasing the overall content creation. You talk about movies alone. Let's not forget that once Disney Plus was created, now Pixar was charged with making television series and additional shorts.
Exactly.
Like, that added to the workload as well. So it's not just even about the movies. They have to create so many different stories all the time. And yes, they have a really, really large bench. And they have a lot of filmmakers that they work with. But at the same time, you do have to wonder and suspect that maybe they're just stretched too thin. And we've seen that same exact thing happen with Marvel, which we talk about all the time. And I think we're experiencing very, very similar effects, because when you look over across town and you see what Universal and Illumination are doing with Minions or the Super Mario Brothers movies, they're the king of the world. And then even creatively, DreamWorks, every movie that they put out isn't always necessarily the biggest box office smash, but they're really, really good movies. They're good. Most of the time. They're actually good quality movies. They're memorable. They make me actually want to watch them again. And Sony Animation, like you said, they have a phenomenal win with the Spider-Verse series. And so they got to really reevaluate what the next 5 years looks like for them. I will give them credit for continuing to take swings and developing original stories, because there was a time there where they were laden with sequels. It was just Toy Story 7, Monsters Inc. 6, Incredibles 5.5. Like, it's like, okay, y'all, can we get some new stories?
Hey,
And
Incredibles 3. I'm sure it's around the corner at this
it
point.
has to be. It has to be. We need a fucking
They need
savior to come
They
get us
need
out
it.
this rut. They got to. That's why we heard about Toy Story 5 and all these other things. And so, yeah, I'm very interested to see what the next few years for Pixar looks like, but we will certainly have to stand by and watch as things unfold. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on the brand new Pixar film Elemental. If you checked out this movie, hit us up and let us know what you think.